by Ethiopia today to leave.
We might take time, but at the end of the day, I sincerely believe the people of Tigray will prevail because they have justice in their side.
የኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብ ዳር ቆመው አያይም የሚል ግምት ነበር።
ኢንፎርም አድርጎ እነዚህ ሰዎች ከኛ በላይ እንዲገልጹት ከዘው
በ20ኛ ክፍለ ዘመን በሚኖር ሰውና በ6ኛ ወይ በ7ኛ ክፍለ ዘመን የሚኖሩ ሰዎች እስኪመስል ድረስ
ጦርነትን አውጀው ጦር ሜዳ ላይ የገጠማቸው ሰራዊት አለ። የጦር ሜዳ ላይ ጦርነትን
ከ1.2 ሚሊዮን ህዝብ በላይ አፈናቅለው
The most difficult things is dealing with people that are denying everything that we're saying. So
የእርቅና የሰላም ነገር እንደ አንድ ፋክተር ኢምፖርታንት ፋክተር አድርጎ ማቅረብ ነው።
ሓደ ጊዜ እስቶም ክትሰማማው ዝግባእ ነገራት ተሰማሚያ ሐናይ መኻል
Welcome to our live broadcast. Today, we are honored to have Ambassador David Sheen as our esteemed guest with 37 years of experience in the U.S. State Department. Ambassador Sheen is a seasoned diplomatic figure with a focus on the Horn of Africa region. We are privileged to have him share his knowledge, experiences, and wisdom. His expertise and contributions to diplomacy make him a highly respected authority in international relations. We thank Ambassador Sheen for joining us now for the fourth time, demonstrating his commitment to enlightening our audience. Without further ado, let's welcome Ambassador David Sheen. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador.
Thank you, Bisra.
So we will begin with Sudan conflict based on the ongoing bloody war in Sudan that has led to significant destruction. How do you assess America's efforts to address this crisis and its impact on America's national interest?
Well, first, it's important to point out that what has been going on in Sudan is totally unnecessary. It's essentially a power conflict between two generals or between two military organizations, really. The Sudan Armed Forces, on the one hand, led by General al-Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary organization that basically has its support in Western Sudan, led by another general who is best known as Hemeti. And they have been contesting for power internally in Sudan ever since the two of them together removed the civilian government from the country in 2021. Then they had a falling out as of April 15 of this year and began fighting each other. Basically just so that one or the other of them can control the country. The big losers in all of this are the Sudanese people. They're suffering most of the casualties in the conflict, and their property is being destroyed. They're being forced out of their homes, both as internally displaced persons and as refugees to neighboring countries. And it's just horribly unfortunate. The U.S. role in all of this has been an activist one, in that the American government has been trying to encourage a ceasefire in the first instance, working most recently with Saudi Arabia in order to do so. It has established a couple of ceasefires, although none of them has been fully honored by both sides. There have been violations of all of the ceasefires, and even the most recent discussions about another ceasefire that were taking place in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, have broken down, so that at the moment there's really not much going on in terms of trying to stop the violence in the country, although both the United States and Saudi Arabia are continuing to make themselves available in order to encourage a ceasefire, and the United States even imposed new sanctions on both the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces in order to encourage a ceasefire. The sanctions were modest. They were, frankly, probably not designed to put enough pressure on either side to stop the fighting, and indeed they have not done so. There just aren't that many sanctions left that the U.S. has in order to put enough pressure on the belligerent forces in Sudan. There are other countries that have actually more leverage that they could bring to bear, but so far they don't seem to be willing to do so. So we have a very grim situation at the moment where fighting continues, particularly in Khartoum, the capital, and in Darfur and Western Sudan, and where there's really no end in sight. It almost looks like the two sides both believe they can still win a military conflict, and one or the other thinks it can prevail in this fight. I think that's wrong. I don't think that either side can prevail, but they're the ones involved in it, and they're the ones making that decision.
In your opinion, is America's leadership role in the region diminishing in recent times? If you would like to share your thoughts on the current state of America's involvement in the region.
In a sense, you could answer that both yes and no. Certainly, the effort by the United States has not diminished recently. If you look at what anyone is trying to do in Sudan, particularly, to bring the fighting to an end, the United States is one of the few countries that's trying to do anything. And other countries are basically absent from the scene. They're just not they're not engaged, other than Saudi Arabia and behind the scenes a few others. But there's very little outside effort to try to bring this fighting to a halt. Is that enough? Is the U.S. effort enough? Obviously, it's not, or there would have been more progress than there has been so far. But part of the problem is that much of the leverage that outsiders had has already been used in Sudan. For example, the World Bank and the IMF imposed significant sanctions almost 2 years ago by stopping discussions on debt relief, by withholding billions of dollars in direct funding for Sudan. Those were the kinds of sanctions that should have made a difference, but they didn't. So these more recent sanctions by the United States are very, very minor by comparison. Sanctions against 4 Sudanese companies, 2 affiliated with the Sudan Armed Forces, 2 affiliated with the Rapid Support Forces, and then putting visa restrictions on persons from both organizations from visiting the U.S. Well, I can't imagine that anyone in the Sudan Armed Forces or the Rapid Support Forces even wants to visit the United States right now. So those sanctions are sort of meaningless. And the sanctions on the 4 companies that I referred to don't have much impact because U.S. financial organizations have almost no interactions with them. It's other countries that have the interaction, like Russia, United Arab Emirates. They might have some ability to influence these companies, but the U.S. has quite limited ability to impact these companies.
The peace agreement brokered by China between Saudi and Iran. Let me play a clip of it so that we can talk about it.
Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore diplomatic relations after years of tensions. It's a deal brokered by Beijing. For both Tehran and Riyadh said they will arrange for the return of their ambassadors and attempt to improve bilateral relations. I want to bring in NBC's Josh Letterman, who is in Hong Kong today. Josh, what more do we know about this? This is a significant bit of news.
a significant news and news that was truly a shock to this region, Jose, because while we had known that Saudi Arabia and Iran had held previous rounds of talks on restoring relations in Iraq and in Oman, there were really no indications that this most recent round of talks in China was bearing the kind of fruits that are clearly evident from this deal announced by all three countries today. Within the next 2 months, Iran and Saudi Arabia intend to reopen embassies in each other's countries, but there is still so much that we do not know about how this détente between two geopolitical rivals is going to reshape the Middle East, what implications it will have in Yemen, where Iran and Saudi Arabia have been effectively fighting a proxy war for years, what it means for Iran's nuclear program or for Israel, because remember, Iran and Saudi Arabia have long been arch rivals, and Israel and Iran have also been arch rivals, but Israel has been working on its own to try to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. So the fact that Saudi Arabia is now getting closer to Iran could raise some real problems for Israel's efforts to normalize its own relationships with the Sunni Arab states in the Persian Gulf. So we are looking to see what exactly some of those ramifications are going to be, but clearly a whole lot more chips still to fall here, Jose.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that China is so involved in this is I think, as you said, I mean, it's surprising. It's
considering China's involvement in the recent reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, how do you perceive America's response to Chinese role in this significant diplomatic development?
I think the United States is perfectly happy that China played a role in this case, and a role that seems to have been a positive one. I think that it's important to note that discussions were already underway between Iran and Saudi Arabia towards reestablishing relations before China got involved in it. So that what China did was important, and it was something that the U.S. could not do because we had no relationship with Iran, so we had no ability to influence Iran. So I give them credit for what they did, but it nevertheless was something that was already moving in that direction before China got involved. The fact that China came in and helped consummate the arrangement is as I say, probably a positive development. I think it's also important to point out that this does not necessarily have implications for Chinese involvement in disputes like the conflict in Sudan. Trying to end a war between two competing military organizations in Sudan is 10 times more difficult than trying to get Saudi Arabia and Iran to reestablish diplomatic missions. Neither is easy, but ending a war is a far more complex issue. And as a result, I see no indication that China is trying to step in to the Sudan situation and even do what the U.S. is trying to do, which is working with Saudi Arabia and creating a ceasefire there. China is staying out of that.
So I'm going to play interim Tigray administration. Mike Hammer was there, Ambassador Mike Hammer, and there is protests going on in Tigray and in diaspora as well. Protesters are saying the Pretoria peace agreement must be implemented. IDPs must return to their homes, and further humanitarian access should be given to Tigray. And then there is another protest which is from diaspora from here.
Steal the aid and sell it on the market, but do not penalize our people who survived the genocide, who survived the war, who survived the rape, who survived the massacre, don't let them perish by hunger. Nepal, do the right thing today. Resume aid to Tigray.
And we have Mike Hammer in Meghalaya.
Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Ambassador Mike Hammer, arrived in Meghalaya this morning to discuss implementation of the peace deal with senior leadership of Tigray interim administration. Ambassador Mike Hammer was received by Tigray interim administration President Getachew Reda as he touched down at Meghalaya Lulla Banaga International Airport along with U.S. ambassadors to Ethiopia, Ambassador Tracy and Jacobson. According to Chief Cabinet Secretariat Emmanuel Sefa, the resumption of suspended aid and the returning of IDPs were the essence of the discussion held between the Tigray leadership and the American ambassadors.
They discussed with the interim administration regarding the peace process, the Pretoria peace process, and they focused on the humanitarian aid. As you know, the World Food Program and the USAID paused humanitarian aid distribution to Tigray, and the American government wants to know what actions have been taken so far by the interim administration to resume the humanitarian aid. Secondly, they discussed with the interim administration regarding the DDR, and they discussed about the return of IDPs to their places and the withdrawal of the Eritrean and Amhara forces.
Emmanuel says the decision on TPLF legal personality by the National Election Board of Ethiopia was another issue of the discussion, as it, according to him, puts the legal status of the Tigray interim administration too.
The interim administration or the president of the interim administration has clarified about the decision which had been taken by, given by the National Electoral Board regarding the cancellation of the legal personality of TPLF.
The U.S. Special Envoy has been to Meghalaya on the 25th of April of this year. Emmanuel says after this visit, the Tigray interim administration expects the U.S. will put meaningful pressure to make sure the withdrawal of non-Indian forces from Tigray and the resumption of aid in light of the ongoing humanitarian crisis in the war-torn region.
We expect that the challenges in the Pretoria Agreement will be solved with the engagement of the American government, and we expect that humanitarian aid will soon resume.
United States, along the UN, is observer to the Pretoria Cessation of Hostilities Agreement signed between Ethiopian federal government and the TPLF on the 2nd of November 2022.
The people of Tigray and the Tigray diaspora have been questioning the delay in implementing the Pretoria Agreement, especially in light of Ambassador Mike Hammer's recent visit to Meghalaya. What are your expectations regarding this outcome of this visit and its potential impact?
Well, certainly the United States supports the full implementation of the Pretoria Agreement, and there have been delays in implementing various parts of it. And in all fairness, the government side will claim that there have been some delays in the disarmament on the Tigrayan side. I don't know what's going on the ground, whether there have been delays on both sides or not, but clearly there are elements of the Pretoria Agreement that have not been fully implemented. One of the major concerns is the assurances that humanitarian supplies are able to reach all areas of Tigray. I think they reach many areas of Tigray today, but not all, so that continues to be a problem. And there are concerns in the United States government that not all Eritrean troops have left the immediate border area. And there is the continuing insistence that Eritrean troops leave all parts of Ethiopia and do so immediately. So there are a number of ongoing problems in the implementation of the Pretoria Agreement. The fact is that the fighting has stopped, and that's a good thing. That's the main success so far of the Pretoria Agreement. And the fact that these other issues are taking longer to be implemented is not unusual and frankly not surprising as these agreements go. Rarely are all of the terms met on schedule. And when I first heard the terms of the Pretoria Agreement, I sort of shook my head and said, this is not going to happen on schedule. it's just too ambitious. Things just don't happen that way in this part of the world. So I'm not surprised at all that it's taking longer. Nevertheless, there does need to continue to be pressure from all sides to fully implement the agreement. And I think the United States will continue to play a role to do so, irrespective of who the parties are that are not fully implementing or respecting the agreement.
The Tigray Regional Administration and the people of Tigray had been hopeful IDPs would be able to return to their homes prior to the onset of the rainy season. Regrettably, heavy rainfall in Shire yesterday has adversely affected the IDPs, leading to the destruction of their camps. What, in your opinion, might be the cause of the delay in implementing the return of IDPs to their homes?
No, unfortunately, I don't have enough information on the ground in Tigray to know what all the issues are. I was not aware of the heavy rains, for example, and they obviously can cause enormous problems for any kind of relocation or resettlement. Whether that is the only reason for the current tardiness in returning to homes, I don't know. But obviously, just looking at the scenes that you're showing, that clearly contributes to the problem. But I would have to be on the ground myself to know what all of the local issues are, and I'm simply not there.
Do you believe it is a violation of human rights to withhold relief materials from starving women and children, leading to the use of charity donations in the Maghala market?
Again, if that is happening, clearly it's a violation. I would personally like to be present in the market and see who is doing what to whom before announcing that a certain practice is taking place. And since I'm not there, I'm not in a position to do that. But if it is happening, it's in violation.
Yeah, considering the severe consequences of genocide on the social fabric of the affected region, including the risk of government collapse, what is your opinion on punishing innocent women and children through starvation as a means of addressing the crisis?
Well, it's important to have monitors in the region, independent monitors in the region, who can assess definitively what is going on. Now, I know that there are representatives of international organizations. I don't know who all is there. I don't know what their access is. And I don't know whether there are any international human rights monitors in Tigray at the moment. But these are the people who should be making these kinds of assessments, reporting back to their headquarters, and then trying to ensure that the right thing is being done. And I'm just not in a position to judge whether that is happening or not.
Isaias's visit to Russia and China, we'll play some clips, we'll discuss it.
Президент на днях Эритрея отмечала 30-летие Россия-Африка. Уважаемый господин президент, вы тоже приглашены. В отношениях между нашими странами. Позвольте вас с этим поздравить.
Apologize for the discomfort. These as malleable vehicles of domination. In the past 30 years to impose a unipolar world with Mr. Lavrov, Vladimir, and the subsequent visit of.
So this is what he discussed with President Putin, and we have the Chinese visit here.
Mind of hegemonistic powers. It's sick because why impose sanctions? What is the legality of imposing any sanction? What is the morality of imposing any sanction on any nation? It's a big question mark. It's not only sanctioning Eritrea, but sanctioning all those who uphold their independence and sovereignty. If they don't like you, they will impose sanctions. They will try to cripple your economies. They will try to incite conflict. They will try to destabilize and interfere, and they have no moral or legal high ground to come and intervene or even impose sanctions on any nation. We're fed up of this stupid idea of imposing your will on others' sovereign and independent choice and trying to keep their economies and try to create the disruptions here and there. One of the reasons for trying to create a rift between China and Africa is to promote their own agenda of dominance. And anyone who disagrees with them will have to be punished. For us, been a long experience, we've been able to face this challenge, and in solidarity with our partners in Africa, with China, Asia, Europe, Americas, definitely. It's not deniable. It does disrupt economic development here or there. It cripples abilities here and there. But that's one of the challenges. The damage done to our economy through these sanctions have been tremendous. But we say we have learned our lesson. It has made us more resilient and more determined to continue our struggle, endeavor to change the quality of life by improving our economy.
President of Eritrea garnered attention for supporting Russia's aggression against Ukraine and expressing anti-American sentiment during his visit to China and Russia. How do you think the American perspective will view these actions and their implications?
Well, clearly unfavorably. But let me back up a moment and explain what I suspect President Isaias Afwerki is trying to do. He has effectively alienated Eritrea from almost all of the West in recent years. He does not have friends in the West. So he's looking for friends somewhere, and he seems to have found them in places like China and Russia. Now, Eritrea has something in common with both China and Russia. All three countries oppose the concept of sanctions, for example. The Russians have been sanctioned by the West. Isaias has been sanctioned by the West. China has not been sanctioned for the time being, but China just opposes the whole concept of sanctions. So all three countries are very much in attune on this point. So I think Isaias is effectively searching around for friends wherever he can find them, and he seems to have found them in the form of China and Russia. Now, in the case of China, he actually could presumably obtain some benefits. China's a wealthy country. It still is offering some financing, some foreign aid. It has a lot of trade, including trade with Eritrea. So China has theoretically something to offer. The connection with Russia is a little harder to explain, in that Eritrea has almost nothing in common with Russia in terms of its economy. There's almost zero trade. There's very little Russian investment. There's almost no foreign aid. In fact, there is no foreign aid that I'm aware of from Russia to Eritrea. But what he does have in common is a willingness to support Vladimir Putin's war in the Ukraine. That is the invasion of the sovereignty of Ukraine, something which he just said in that clip, that he's opposed to the violation of sovereignty in countries around the world, yet it seems to be okay if Russia invades Ukraine. And Russia is very appreciative for that support. So even though there's no significant economic link between Russia and Eritrea, there is this mutual desire to support each other politically in international forums like the United Nations, where Russia will be very happy to prevent any sanctions or try to prevent any sanctions against Eritrea. and Eritrea will willingly take the position of Russia on issues such as the invasion of Ukraine. So they're mutually supporting each other, even though they otherwise have little in common. There's the one wild card issue in the case of Russia and Eritrea, and that is that Russia has been in discussion with Eritrea since at least 2018 about creating some kind of a logistics hub in either Massawa or Assab that the Russians could use, presumably for military purposes. Now that, to the best of my knowledge, has not materialized. It's not clear where it stands or whether Russia is even continuing to pursue it. But at some point, I think you can assume that Russia will return to that idea and try to establish, when it has the funds and when it has the time and the ability, perhaps after the war is over with Ukraine, to put some kind of facility in to either Assab or Massawa. The United States does not like to see this kind of engagement, obviously, in the Red Sea, and will try to prevent it from happening. But the U.S. relationship with Eritrea at the moment is highly estranged. There's not much that the United States can do about it, except to monitor the situation. But I'm not looking to see an important relationship develop between Russia and Eritrea in the foreseeable future, because I don't think either country has much to offer the other.
Позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России. Хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф. Для защиты нашей Родины, ее суверенитета и территориальной целостности, для обеспечения безопасности нашего народа и людей на освобожденных территориях, считаю необходимым поддержать предложение Министерства обороны и Генерального штаба о проведении в Российской Федерации частичной мобилизации. Мы не можем, не имеем никакого морального права отдать близких нам людей на растерзание палачам.
I don't speak Russian, but based on this subtitles, he's saying in his recent statement, President Putin mentioned that Russia possesses various advanced weapons of mass destruction and will use them to protect its territorial integrity and people if necessary. What are your thoughts on this statement, especially in relation to its impact on American interests?
Well, the statement taken at face value is okay. I mean, every country will argue that it has the right to respect its territorial integrity. The problem becomes if he considers as part of his territory all or part of the Ukraine, then that's another matter. That's a foreign country. It's an independent country, a sovereign country. And the United States would certainly not go along with the idea that he has the right to use anything at his disposal to take over the Ukraine. So that's where the disagreement comes up, and it's hard to know what President Putin is referring to there. But if he's referring strictly to current Russian territory, then the statement is not objectionable.
This brings us to the last question. Biden has been on spotlight. Many Americans are concerned about his capability to run for the second term. What are your thoughts about President Biden, whether to run for the second term or not? What are your thoughts about this?
Clearly, there is a discussion going on in the United States as to what the role of age is in his ability to run and in theory win another 4 years in office. I believe that would take him up to age 86 if he were to succeed in that goal. And that would make him far and away the oldest president ever in American history. And those are legitimate concerns by the American public. I'm older than Biden is, so I have an appreciation for what age can and cannot do to you. At the same time, I don't feel like I'm on death's bed at this point or anything. So, but I'm not running for president either. So I can appreciate the arguments that are being used against him. A lot of it's going to depend upon what the alternative is, and without getting into the various possible alternatives at this point, that would be another very long discussion. That obviously will be the preoccupying issue: who will be opposing him. And depending upon who it is, will make a big difference in terms of, I think, how the American people will react to another 4 years of President Biden. It's a hard call, a hard decision. Age does take a toll. There's no doubt about it. And he's more aware of that than anyone. He likes to respond, well, don't hold age against me. It's that much more wisdom that I have. And there's some truth to that too. I think wisdom does come with just having had more life experiences, and he certainly has had a lot of them. He's also shown that he's been able to govern surprisingly well in the last 2+ years. His accomplishments are really quite surprising. And I think eventually the American people will consider that as an important factor in how they decide to vote come the next election in the United States. So it's worthy of debate, and I think even Biden acknowledges that. But I would not use age as the only factor in terms of making a decision as to how, at least in my view, I think the American people ought to deal with this situation.
Ambassador Shin, we sincerely appreciate your insightful reflections today, and we look forward to the opportunity of engaging with you on various other subjects in the future. On behalf of Tigrai Press and our audience, we extend our best wishes for your happiness and continued good health in all your future endeavor.
Thank you, Bisra. The Eritrean forces, which are the only external forces I know of inside Ethiopia today, to leave.
We might take time, but at the end of the day, I sincerely believe the people of Tigray will prevail because they have justice in their side.
የኢትዮጵያ ሕዝብ ዳር ቆሞ አያይም የሚል ግምት ነበረ።
ኢንፎርም አድርጎ እነዚህ ሰዎች ከኛ በላይ እንዲገልጹት ከዘው
በ20ኛ ክፍለ ዘመን በሚኖር ሰውና በ6ኛ ወይ በ7ኛ ክፍለ ዘመን የሚኖሩ ሰዎች እስኪመስል ድረስ
ጦርነትን አውጀው ጦር ሜዳ ላይ የገጠማቸው ሰራዊት አለ። የጦር ሜዳ ላይ ጦርነትን
ከ1.2 ሚሊዮን ህዝብ በላይ አፈናቅለው
The most difficult things is dealing with people that are denying everything that we're saying. So
የእርቅና የሰላም ነገር እንደ አንድ ፋክተር ኢምፖርታንት ፋክተር አድርጎ ማቅረብ ነው።
ሓደ ጊዜ እስቶም ክትሰማማም